The story begins from the moment when the main character with black hair and in a white robe found herself on her knees right in the center of a luxurious building, where a stern voice called her Liarte Elhain. A girl of extraordinary beauty, with deep blue eyes, raised her head and looked at the one who had called her, while clear drops of cold water flowed from her face and hair. In front of the heroine, there appeared a gray-haired aristocrat with golden hair, who condescendingly told her that, unlike her twin brother Leon, she had not awakened her power since she was 20 years old, which was unacceptable. Not far from the girl stood her brother, who was wet from the rain, and he was also silent, because the older man explained to the protagonist that she would sacrifice herself for the sake of improving the powers of Leon, weak and small. Leon is very similar to his sister, but his serious face makes it clear that he is not sad about the imminent death of his sister, who will give her life only so that his magic becomes more majestic and stronger. But Liarte was not happy that the family had decided to get rid of her in this way, so she just looked down and continued to get wet in the rain, listening to her father's false promise that they would remember her. Closing her eyes, she realized that she was the only one in the Elheim family who had not awakened. That is, by the time she came of age, she had not been able to show her magic, which is why they wanted to say goodbye to her. The girl hunched over even more because she was overcome with sadness and melancholy, because everyone considered her a disgrace to the duchy, a creature that no one loved, no matter how hard she tried to do so. But the father, who had the same blue eyes, in which, unlike the protagonist, there was only indifference and severity, ordered the servants to immediately begin the ritual that would make his son stronger. Soon, 5 magicians surrounded the very young girl, and her father, who was nearby, only watched as a bright azure circle appeared on the stones, and as a blue crystal levitated over the head of the saddened Liarte. When the magic of water engulfed her and the girl's body was enveloped in splashes of the purest blue element, she raised her head and with a tear on her face realized that all her life she had not been able to make someone love her. However, the heroine despaired too early because the magic stone, which had been above her head all this time, began not only to glow beautifully, but also to tremble, which was very difficult for those around her not to notice. The first to notice a very important change in the mineral was the girl's father, who looked at it in amazement and opened his lips, realizing that, in fact, the majestic power of water had awakened precisely thanks to his daughter. The heroine of the story's brother also noticed a strange but incredibly significant event, and he was no less surprised because all this time he thought that only he was the owner of the magical dignity. But this was only the beginning, because in full view of everyone, the stone cracked in different places, and from those cracks several blinding rays appeared, rushing in different directions, because Liarte was its awakener. The magicians themselves noticed something that should not have appeared according to the ritual plan. So one of them, continuing to hold his hands straight, was the first to ask those around him what was happening and why everything was changing. The other sorcerer immediately turned to the master and with a shocked expression on his face told him that the spirit stone had finally awakened and that it was only thanks to the main character, a seemingly ordinary girl. The magical power was so great that the ancient relic that the Elheim family guarded shattered into small pieces, causing the light from it to become even brighter, more dazzling and stronger. And the main character seems to have lost consciousness because she is in the very center of incredible magic, which is why everyone is watching the seemingly sleeping madam when a real miracle is happening around her. In fact, at that moment, Liarte seemed to have sunk to the bottom of her own dark memories and thoughts about how she would really like to escape from her family, but was never able to do so. But even through the mental pain, she still decided to open her eyes and stay alive, which she did, looking at the amazed witnesses of the magical awakening with blue, oceanic eyes. The girl's power was so great that it awakened not only the sacred water, but also its keeper, a handsome guy, who immediately excitedly extended his hand to her, as if begging her not to end her life. However, at this point the heroine's dream ended, because suddenly she woke up on her bed, abruptly opening her eyes and remembering with shock everything that she had dreamed in an incredible, prophetic dream. Looking around, Liarte realized that she was still in her wooden room, and then the girl remembered that in her dream this room had been burned down right before the execution, where she found herself awakened. Sitting down on the bed, the lady only began to look around with reassurance, realizing that it was just a dream, but it has much more meaning, because it is certainly prophetic, predicting the future. Frowning and feeling a bead of sweat trickle down her cheeks, the girl asked herself why she had survived, but she was unable to answer her own question, as she knew little herself. Liarte didn't have to be bored for long because almost immediately after she woke up from a terrible dream, the one who opened the door to the heroine's room with his hand wanted to enter her room. The guest in her chambers turned out to be her twin brother, who, looking at his sister, immediately asked how she was feeling, although from his emotionless face it was impossible to tell that he was worried about her. The girl also did not greet him with a smile, but only looked at her brother with anxiety, asking why he was here, since in fact he was not so often interested in her as a close person. Leon looked at the modestly sitting lady, who continued to look at him and wait for an answer. But his brother was in no hurry to answer, because he himself asked her why, in her opinion, he came here. Coming a little closer and closing his eyes, the heroine's twin calmly told her that he had come only to find out how she was feeling, because due to recent events, it was clearly not too good. Suddenly, the guy grabbed the lady's hand so sharply that she couldn't remove it. But the guy only needed this to scare his sister, because in his soul he feels great hostility towards her. His indifferent blue eyes rose and looked at the girl, as if he did not feel love for her, but only anger and hostility, which seemed to have been in their relationship from the very beginning of life. Having drilled the young, shocked girl with his gaze, the brother in expensive clothes rudely told the lady that today all his plans had failed, and it was all because of her. At that moment, having confessed to his sister that she was incredibly annoying to him, Leon looked at her with such furious, cruel eyes that it would have become clear to anyone that he could not stand her for a single minute. Liarte could only stare with her crystal blue eyes in shock at the one who had never really loved her, but only despised and oppressed her, which is what she was doing now. At that moment, the girl remembered that 3 years ago she had protected him from hired killers, risking her body and life, while the guy himself stood fearfully behind and did not know what to do in an unforeseen situation. Then the heroine of the story received serious injuries, from which she fell to the floor and, having lost a lot of blood, lost consciousness. And it was because of her condition that her brother had to postpone all his plans, about which he is still angry. Looking at Leon with indifference and understanding, the girl realized that she not only remembered everything, but returned to the past, thanks to which she could change everything, knowing what would happen in the future and how it would affect her. At that moment, the girl realized that this time she would not coddle her brother and protect him. So she hit Leon's palm with a movement of her hand and thereby pulled him away from herself, answering that he also irritated her. Looking at the one who constantly caused her unbearable pain, the girl seemed to tell herself that this time she would not act so stupidly and recklessly, so she would not help him in any way or protect him from troubles. The sharp and sudden words of the once quiet and withdrawn sister, who tolerated everything, surprised Leon so much that he lost the power of speech, continuing to look at the lady with bewilderment and incomprehension of what had happened. But the tension between the relatives was broken by a third person, who decided to open the door just as unexpectedly and immediately call Leon, saying that he needed to follow him immediately. The blonde man held the door with his hand and looked at the guy who was sitting on the bed and asked him what was the matter, also calling him Ain. Ain briefly explained to the aristocrat that his father had ordered all the awakened to be summoned because the spirit stone had suddenly begun to shine, and also, presenting that very mineral, the nobleman told Leon that he absolutely had to look at it. The gruff gentleman decided to end the conversation with the Cetra without even saying goodbye to her, but only standing up, looking at the man and ordering him to tell more about the magic stone when they went to it. The two young aristocrats hurried out of the room, but one of them turned around before leaving and looked at the lady with disdain, as if he too had a claim on her. His gaze was filled with not just disdain, but hatred, as if Liarte was not a family member for everyone, but an outcast who should be avoided and disliked only because she did not have any magical abilities. Because of the inappropriate attitude, the girl hunched over as she did not want to feel the sharp glances of her relatives, but she continued to look at Ain with distrust and silence. When everyone left and she was finally left alone, the heroine lowered her eyes and, sadly thinking, remembered that at the moment of her execution, in a dream she noticed that the spirit stone had split and energy had emerged from it. Remembering only brief moments from the dream, which quite possibly showed her the future, the girl realized that she was the one who would awaken the immense Vedic water force. Squeezing her fingers under her palm, Liarte realized that now, being alone, she should try to awaken at least a small part of her magic in order to make sure that the dream was reality, and she was not deceiving herself. Raising both hands and taking a straight pose, the girl brought her palms closer to each other and, closing her eyes, tried to start the spell to work so that at least one magical drop of water would appear between her hands. Liarte did not expect anything supernatural, but she still continued to try, because as she thought, a luminous element appeared between her hands, still very small. But when the heroine began to try harder, the water ball, hovering thanks to the air, became larger and the light from it acquired a greater glow, illuminating not only her hands but also her light dress. The magic made the girl smile, thanks to which at least a small part of her power made her smile, and she no longer looked sad, unhappy, depressed because of loneliness. Then, lowering her hands and raising an angry gaze, the brunette realized that she had nevertheless awakened the magical power, and if fate gave her a chance, this time she would definitely leave the duchy, which she had not been able to do in her past life. Just the thought of her life being better made her eyes light up with the desire to leave her aristocratic family and become anyone she wanted, just so she wouldn't have to meet her brother or father. While the girl was deciding on radical changes in her new life, one nameless aristocrat was already moving in a carriage towards her castle through dense forest thickets, where there are not even animals or birds. In the red carriage itself, a nobleman with a maroon bandage over his eyes sits relaxed, who, putting his palm to his face, answers his interlocutor that he still sees nothing. And nothing helps him. A knight or servant with short blonde hair and a cloak sitting next to him said that Duke Elhine still thought that the commotion with the murderers who maimed his daughter was his doing, so he did not think that the nobleman would agree to help him. Lowering his head, the blonde man with the red headband replied that there was no other choice, because only his family could lift the curse from him, and if he refused to help, then he would collect dirt on him. Conversations with the nobleman, of course, captivated the nameless knight, but he still looked out the window because he heard and saw strange movements there, unusual for a forest area. Continuing to look at something in the window, the man informed the aristocrat that it seemed the imperial family had sent him a gift, but the blonde man with the bandage only replied that he would return it back as usual. It turns out that the servant had in mind a pair of assassins in dark robes, who were already looking at their target in the form of a red carriage and holding sharp weapons in their hands, with which they wished to deal with the heroes. The guy with the bandage had already activated his dark, smoky magic, preparing to teach the killers a lesson with a smile. But his servant asked what he would do if someone were to free him from blindness, and the man replied that he would do absolutely anything for him. When one of the murderers was already affected by the man's deadly magic, which was wrapped around his neck, the aristocrat continued to explain to the servant that he would not only do everything, but also restore justice. While the second criminal was already preparing to lie down on the ground from lack of strength, the fair-haired guy added to his words that he would destroy all enemies for the sake of the one who dared to help him. Then the blonde in light decided to take off the blindfold from his eyes, holding it with his palm and lowering it down, because he wanted to tell his friend something sincere, important, and meaningful. In front of the guard was a non-ugly, smiling guy with unusual, cursed red eyes, who directed his eyes in his direction and said that he would do it because he was from the Birch family. After some time, when the sunset was already over the castle of the ducal family, the member of the Birch family already found himself inside a beautiful, snow-white palace, decorated with minimalistic ornaments. In front of the hero, there was a table with a tray and a teapot with tea, next to which lay books, and a pleasant ray of sunset fell on all the objects when Birch himself sat and prepared to begin a dialogue with another. In front of Mikael there appeared the father of the main character, stern and gloomy, who, looking at his guest with an unkind look, immediately asked him what brought him here and for what reason he came to him. But unlike his interlocutor, the blonde turned out to be not so cold, because although he sat with a red blindfold on his eyes, he smiled slyly, answering the Duke that he had a request for him. Leaning on his arm, the relaxed guy said that if he was discouraged by his visit, he could kick him out right now. But he had one proof that he had not come here spontaneously. The man pulled out a written envelope with a red seal from somewhere, showing it to the aristocrat and saying that he had official permission to visit, which is what this neat piece of paper with wax was. But even this did not surprise the white-haired Duke. He continued to look at the guest with indifference and calmness, without saying anything, because he could not so easily believe his old enemy. The Duke knows very well that inside the envelope is a short but very important letter, meaning that the guest really has permission to visit someone, because the Emperor and his temple have approved it. But the elderly man only narrowed his eyes because he understood only that his interlocutor was deceiving him for the sake of something. And Mikael, noticing the change in the aristocrat's mood, asked what was wrong. Under the red bandage, the boy still had his eyes open, because he really wanted to know why his friend had fallen silent, and with a smile asked the Duke if he was afraid of Birch's power if he couldn't hear his voice. But the gray-haired man did not respond to any of the words of the noble guest, because he immediately and very clearly ordered the blonde to say what brought him here. The owner of the palace and the nobleman were sitting opposite each other in a spacious room. When the guy with the bandage answered the gentleman in black that he had gone completely blind, and even the saints could not remove the curse. Then, remembering that the Duke had a daughter and a son who clearly possessed water power, the blonde explained that only such an awakened one could help him, and he would be very grateful for that. Before that, smiling slyly, the gray-haired man continued to look at Mikael with a red bandage, saying that this could deprive the awakened of life, so it would be better to wait for a well-wisher who himself wanted to heal him from blindness. Smiling slyly at his guest again, the Duke showed Mikael his index finger, and when darkness seemed to appear around him, he said that he was giving him 1 month to find a volunteer here. The ultimatum did not please Bersha, so he abruptly stopped smiling, as if he was no longer playing by his own rules, but following the instructions of some malicious, heartless Duke. Mikael's dark-gloved hand clenched slightly in desperation, and at one point he even thought about refusing this suspicious offer, but he still agreed to the conditions. And so, having told the Duke that he would wait for the arrival of a volunteer who would sacrifice himself for him, he remained in the snow-white palace with beautiful ornaments on which the red rays fell. Immediately after the conversation with the aristocrat, Mikael, accompanied by his knight, walked down the corridor, telling him that, as he thought, the master had not lifted the curse from him, because they were old enemies of each other. As the gentleman continued walking down one of the corridors, which is located in a large, unique, skillful castle, he confessed to the knight that he did not even think that someone would come who would risk himself for him. However, he does not even suspect that in the window, a desperate girl is watching the sunset, who will grab every opportunity to get out of this palace once and for all, that her spirit was not here. As soon as darkness fell, Mikael's servant, who had been keeping a close eye out for a volunteer, realized that no one had come to risk themselves for him. With a smile, the servant looked at the blonde man and asked him if he would stay here even if no one came to him on this dark night just to help with his blindness. Meanwhile, the aristocrat himself continued to lie relaxed on the sofa with his lips slightly open, not saying a word, because thoughts about such a difficult situation did not leave him for a minute. He placed his palm and smiled, not beginning to speak, which interested the knight, who crossed his arms and moved closer to his master. And Mikael, with a sly grin, told the servant only that he was very interested in the meeting of the awakened, which his old enemy had started, because their confrontation promised to be interesting. The knight continued to look at the gentleman, not understanding what insidious thoughts were arising in his mind and what he was up to. But soon he informed him that this was a reason to visit the Duke. Having named the servant Valto, the blonde man with the red armband waved his hand at him and told him to immediately go to the duchy and collect information about Elhain in order to quickly find out all the most secret intentions of the enemy. Having bowed, the boy with short hair smiled sweetly at his master and said that he would immediately go and carry out his task and would do it as well as he could. Having left the aristocrat, Valto left him completely alone in a quiet and dark room. But he was not worried, since if something happened, the master himself could give a strong rebuff to the offenders with his magic. The smile disappeared from his face, and he touched his chin, thinking that most likely his vision would never return, because he did not believe in the awakened and there would be no one who would help him. Above him hung a luxurious chandelier, decorated with expensive stones, but he could not even enjoy its beauty, because he was blind, who constantly thought about his problems and loneliness. He imagined his own magic around him, remembering that he could still use it despite his blindness. But if this continued, he might lose control of it. But the blonde's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise that he heard, and because of which he hurried to get up, instinctively looking in the direction where he heard the enemy, the uninvited guest, approaching. He had already begun to approach the door, where he heard a strange noise with a smile and words about how he didn't like uninvited people. But Mikael had no idea that behind the slightly open door stood the main character in a light cape, excited and a little confused. However, the guy was already about to use his magic, which caused black smoke to ooze from his palm, and before attacking, he once again loudly asked the stranger who he was and why he came. Then the girl stuck her head out from behind the wall a little and replied that she was not a murderer and certainly not an awakened water spirit, so he had no need to use his power. As soon as the blonde approached the stranger even one step, he immediately felt an incredible aroma, like the spray of waves, light and elusive, surprising with its existence. Even with the bandage on his head, Mikael opened his blind eyes wide in surprise, catching the notes of a scent that he seemed to have never heard or smelled before. Continuing to catch the celestial oceanic scents of the stranger, the blonde realized that in front of him was not an ordinary member of the Elhine family, but a person possessing a pure, magical aura. He himself did not see how the fearless main character dared to take off her white hood in order to appear before Mikael at any moment, and, it seemed, help him with the problem. The blue-eyed blonde looked at the blind man not with contempt and hatred, as everyone before her had done, but with bright feelings and regret, because no one else responded to end his grief. Understanding from the voice that it was a girl standing in front of him, Mikael stood in front of her and immediately asked how she found him. But the silent lady was in no hurry to answer, but only moved a couple of steps closer to him. The main character never told the guy how she found him, because she immediately said that she could help him remove the curse, and Mikael, having calmed down a little, asked her what she meant. The long-haired lady continued to look straight into his blind eyes, which were actually wide open and surprised with shock, and she asked him what he would do for her if he restored her sight. It seems that the heroine of the story was serious in her intentions, because she spoke without a smile or mockery, and this amazed the aristocrat, who would have been even more amazed if he had seen her beauty. Instead, he continued to look at her with his lips parted, but as much as he wanted to see her appearance, he could still only hear her voice. Listen to the smell and the light gusts of wind. Easily grabbing the girl's hand, he leaned towards her and kissed her, smiling and promising that he would do everything for her and even more if the heroine dared to use her gift to heal him. The aristocrat's words touched the girl so much that her blue eyes also opened wide in surprise, and at that moment she realized that Mikael was the one great chance to escape from here forever. They came too close to each other, but only so that Mikael could convince his savior that he would definitely do for her everything that she wanted from him. After that, the man immediately sat down on the sofa, because the brunette told him that she would first check his condition, but Liarte, looking at the gentleman's character, understands that he is far from a weak guy. The first thing she did was extend her hand to him, saying that before the most important thing, she would remove the bandage from him, before healing him with her own magic. The girl was already untying the tight knots on the back of the blonde man's head, which made him suddenly fall silent, relying only on the sensations and smells that the kind stranger and owner of the charm gave him. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't remove the bandage the first time, or even the second time, which she told Mikael, saying that the knots were too tight. But the guy only said that he tied it like that so as not to constantly call the knights, who already guard him from problems around the clock. The heroine of the story did not even suspect that under the red ribbon the aristocrat's eyes were open, but they looked thoughtful, because in fact he himself can untie the knots, but does not want to say it. Feeling Liarte's hands and fingers near his ear as they continued to untie the knots, Mikael understood that although he could not see, he could perfectly feel her hands, which were surely delightful. He himself did not notice how the heroine managed to untie the bandage, but at that moment he was thinking about something completely different with his eyes closed, realizing that for him these were acute, but at the same time unusual sensations. The red ribbon fell down as the blue-eyed girl looked into the aristocrat's equally burgundy eyes, which he opened for her without ever seeing her black curls or white clothes. Mikael looked at the girl, but he still couldn't see her face. And even if he had, he would have realized that her unusual crimson eyes with black eyelashes surprised her greatly, and they looked like they were definitely cursed. But deep inside them, the main character noticed strange symbols and circles that clearly did not indicate anything good, but indicated that not simple magic had been used on Mikael, but incredibly dark magic. The main character was very surprised, which was visible on her face, because she knows dark magic well, because in childhood she read about it in books from her father's library, and it was this memory that surfaced in her memory. She imagined in her mind a black skull, decorated not with simple feathers, but with magical power that is not so easy to remove. So Liarte is sure that the treatment will not be simple if strong spells are involved. This is what she decided to tell Mikael, pulling her hand away from his eyes and telling him with anger on her face that, unfortunately, this is black magic, one of the strongest in the world, which can only be removed by a true water awakened. The girl immediately remembered and imagined in her mind its appearance, namely a mystical eye surrounded by mysterious chains and circles. Then Liarte realized that the spell consisted of 7 seals. Mikael listened to the heroine's words in surprise, saying that he did not understand how she knew all this, because Duke Elhine could not stand dark magic, which is why he forbade her to even take an interest in it. But in fact, the main character knows the answer to the guy's question, but this makes her embarrassed because the first time she won't be able to tell him the whole truth, because she is too shy and doesn't know where to start. Then the girl remembered that as a child, she read forbidden books in the library because in this way she wanted to somehow help her family, who despised her because of her lack of magical powers. Clenching her fist, the main character looked bravely at the blind man and told him that if he didn't start treatment right now, things could only get worse, and so she would immediately begin magic. Mikael sat with a calm face when the girl put her hand to his forehead, and at that moment he was surrounded by water magic, magical and enchanting, helping him to regain his vision at least a little. The heroine also watched what she was doing, because this was her first time creating it. But despite all the shortcomings, she could still control the water, watching it with her blue eyes. And the boy decided to close his eyes, allowing the powerful force to heal him from the disease, while his head was occupied with thoughts about whether there really was a possessor of such great magic in the Elhine family. The water surrounded him on all sides and seemed to relax him, but in his thoughts he saw only one bright question in front of him regarding who this sweet, kind lady was and what her name was. A few seconds later, Liarte informed Mikael that she had finished the treatment, and immediately after it, the guy unusually touched his face and eyes, as if something had changed in him and different sensations had appeared. Instinctively looking at the heroine, the man told her that it had become a little easier, and she, stretching out her hands to him, said that it would be difficult for his body to endure the removal of all the seals at once, so she would heal him once a day. She put the hood back on her head in order to remain hidden, and turning to the gentleman, informed him that they would now see each other tomorrow and that they should now say goodbye. The man remained sitting relaxed on the blue sofa with his eyes closed, answering the lady that he would certainly wait for her visit, since she was the only one who helped him in this unfriendly castle. As if wanting to unsee the girl's face with his blind eyes at the last moment, Mikael raised his red eyes in her direction and said that he did not know her name, but he would still see her tomorrow. The main character was about to leave the blonde man's room with slow steps, but she paused, still saying goodbye to the young man in a wary voice and promising him that she would return tomorrow. Mikael was left alone again. So with one hand, he grabbed the bandage that had previously fallen to the floor in order to feel it with his fingers and think about what he had just experienced. He felt the most unpleasant loneliness because he did not even hear the rustle of the wind or the singing of birds. But everything around him seemed to become lighter and brighter when his head was filled with thoughts of the stranger. The fact is that in a past life, half of the territory of Elhine was mired in a war that every now and then engulfed the beautiful snow-white castle of the Liarte family, as if trying to destroy it, turn it into ashes. And all this happened only thanks to Mikael Birsche, an experienced military commander who witnessed the entire battle and admired it, smiling like a sly fox, because he is the main enemy of the Duke. Then the Duke, the father of the main character, being in a hopeless situation, told his daughter that only her sacrifice could save them all, although in fact the whole war began only because he himself ridiculed Birsch and his family, and then Mikael decided to take revenge on him. Like a mad king, the spruce-haired dad Liarte told the heroine that only her death would awaken the Spirit Stone and make her brothers stronger, and then they would be able to defeat the all-powerful blonde with a blindfold. But now that the sad protagonist knows about it, because she has the chance to live her life over again, she realizes with sad eyes that the owner of the water power is not her brother, but herself. With such thoughts, the heroine was in her room and, it seems, wanted to be alone. But in her chambers stood a gloomy brother, like a dark cloud, who again probably wanted to mock his sister. The heroine continued to sit royally on the chair when the next day Lian came to her, standing in front of her and clearly wanting to mock her again, admitting that she infuriated him. The girl looked at her stupid but handsome Barat, realizing that if her father knew that she was the majestic force, he would never have done this to her. But he was only mistaken in thinking that his son was stronger. It seemed that in Liarte's blue eyes there was only sadness and indifference to everything. But in her head she remembered that after coming of age she would no longer belong to the family, and therefore would leave it. Deciding not to remain silent, the heroine stood up from her chair first and went to her silent brother, asking what happened. And Leon answered her that he came to check on her condition after the recent attack by the killers. But Liarte, who had already lived her first life and knew that her brother would never appreciate her, decided to be cold towards him, only straightening the curls of her hair and asking what business it was of his. The girl's words surprised the Duke's son so much that he looked at her with stunned eyes, not understanding why she had previously risked her life to protect him from murderers, and now was pushing him away. Unable to bear it, he clenched his fist, understanding only that even when she felt better after the great loss of blood, she continued to behave as if she had never loved him before. He decided not to create a scandal, but only gesticulated with his hand and replied that her health was the most important thing to him. But he did not suspect that the heroine who was looking at him did not care about this. The girl just crossed her arms and, looking at him, said that she knew why he was saying that. Namely because without her, he would not be able to use magic normally and be strong. Lian just pursed his lips because he couldn't answer his sister who had just told him the pure truth. But he still had to continue pretending to be interested in her health condition. Chuckling discontentedly, the gloomy guy told the lady that from now on she could only move around during the day and often walk around the palace grounds so as not to sit in the stuffy room. This was the only thing the guy wanted to say to the young girl, so he hurried out of her room without even saying goodbye, stopping near her door with sad, empty thoughts. He leaned against the door of Liarte's room, not understanding why she had wanted to be useful to everyone all her life, protected him from everyone, and then decided to become so cold that now he too felt uneasy. The boy remembered the very moment when his sister recently sacrificed her life and body to protect him from killers, and then he realized that from that very day, she became completely different. He no longer saw her smiling, sad, or worried about him. On the contrary, in front of him, Liarte only waved her hand and always said that she did not care about his attention, and that was why he was sad. Lian lowered his head and could not understand what had changed her so much and whether it was his fault. But no matter how hard he tried to get to the truth, the facts only said that now she did not want his attention. Gritting his teeth in anger, the guy realized that all this time she had only been pleasing him, and now she had shown her true face, although in fact the girl had only begun to value herself. However, Lian's deep thoughts and anger towards his sister were interrupted by Ain, who suddenly appeared in front of him and called out his brother's name, not understanding why he was standing alone in the corridor and was suspiciously silent. But Ain appeared before his brother to inform him that the glow of the spirit stone had increased, and so Lian decided to immediately go to the shining room with articles and architectures to see everything. Two brothers appeared near the stone, which in the main character's dreams split and began to shine with a blinding light. But now it is still intact, continuing to hover in the air and shine brighter and brighter. Lian looked at his brother with a slightly worried but more saddened look, asking him how long he had been shining like that, because the whole situation with the magical artifact was becoming more suspicious. Gesturing with his hand, Ain answered the brunette that according to others, the stone had been shining like that since the beginning of the day, and that definitely meant that something significant would happen soon, and maybe someone was involved in it. After his brother's words, Lian immediately wanted to test the properties of the stone on himself, namely, to try to touch it and look at the changes. But when he extended his hand to it, the mineral did not react in any way. A cold drop of sweat began to run down the guy's face when he tragically realized that the stone did not react even to him, the direct heir to the ducal throne, and just the thought of it frightened him incredibly. While the heroine's brother was anxiously wondering who the stone was reacting to if its presence did not change anything in it, Liarte herself, with a candle in her hand and a cape, was already getting ready to visit Mikael. It was pitch dark night, and only the moonlight could illuminate the clouds and the earth. And it was the moonlight that helped the main character sneak up on the blind blonde man unnoticed in order to remove another seal and cure him of the curse. Mikael was still sitting on his favorite sofa and seemed to be smiling slyly when the stranger who had previously promised to visit him every night for healing appeared in front of him. The strange, unusual noises made him realize that it was not an enemy or a killer in front of him, but a nameless girl, so he greeted her with a smile, greeting her first. The protagonist of the story also greeted Mikael when she took off her hood and looked at him with her unusually beautiful blue eyes, like a wave of a clear ocean. The girl came closer to the gentleman, and then the blonde asked her if she was tired of calling him that. But the lady only asked again if he meant that she only called him gentleman or by his full name. The girl's hand lightly lifted Mikael's face to better see his blindness, but he continued to smile at the nameless lady, saying that from now on she would be better off calling him simply by his first name. The main character did not answer because she was very surprised by the man, thereby looking at him with open eyes, because for her, this man should be an enemy, as well as for the whole family, especially since he is a person respected by many and a real aristocrat. But the girl still did as the guy told her. Namely, she agreed to his request and called him by name, and Mikael, hearing only her words, assumed that she was not the least bit embarrassed. She had already removed the bandage from the face of the young gentleman, who could not stop smiling and thinking that most likely his new girlfriend was very cold-blooded or smart, which was what fascinated him. In a dark room with only moonlight illuminating the furniture, the pair had a brief conversation about blindness, with Mikael telling her that his vision had improved a little, but he still couldn't see much. The main character told him that they would remove another seal that night, and immediately after that, her magic shone in the dark room, and she herself closed her eyes while Mikael looked at her in surprise. The young gentleman's hand began to tremble unusually, as if he was worried or experiencing severe pain, anxiety, embarrassment, and the main character, responsible for his health, could not help but notice this. She opened her eyes a little wider and looked at his palm, realizing that perhaps the treatment was causing Mikael slight discomfort that he was trying to hide, but it was manifesting itself in the form of slight tics. Then, in order to quickly calm the worried man, she placed her small palm on his trembling hand, and his anxiety almost immediately disappeared somewhere, as if this was what he needed all this time. Frowning before the spell, the girl looked resolutely at the guy with blue, shining eyes and firmly told him to trust her, because nothing bad would happen and she would not harm him. The man's red eyes widened even more in surprise because, after this, the kind lady, whose hand constantly touched his cheek, promised him that she would not only be there, but also cure him of blindness. At that moment, the guy felt only lightness and relaxation, warmth, most likely manifested in the form of light crystals of goodness, and he himself could not stop thinking about her fragile palms. Before the hero, there appeared a lady who was fearless towards him, who showed all her magical power of water only for his treatment. But only Liarte's words fascinated Mikael, who was previously cold and aloof. He sat in front of her with his head raised, as if trying to unsee even a small part of her magic, or even her herself. But all his efforts were in vain, because the curse was still strong. Then, in order not to embarrass the girl with his silence, Mikael told the girl with a smile that he believed her and would trust her, even if he did not know her name or appearance, since she was incredibly charming. The girl, focused on water magic, continued to control the water with her hand, which could cure the man of blindness, while he himself thought that he had never been so interested in anyone. Just both hands of the silent lady were enough for her sacred element to surround them both, thereby removing one seal from the guy's curse, weakening his blindness, the pain in his eyes. Only when the treatment was completely completed did Madame open her eyes, and with her rich blue eye sockets, as if saturated with magic, look at Mikael to check on his well-being. She saw a surprised blonde man with red eyes in front of her, but still asked if it had hurt him and how he felt now. Mikael smiled sheepishly and answered the girl, slightly confused that he felt even better now. But he still couldn't stop thinking that now the lady interested him not as a sorceress or a healer. Unexpectedly for the guy himself, the main character did not rush to leave him, but sat down next to him, which stunned him. But Liarte continued to calmly talk to him, answering that she was afraid that he would be uncomfortable. The lady's behavior made Bircha smile, because everyone treated him with hostility and disdain. But suddenly a young lady appeared who not only did not despise him, but also agreed to heal him from magic. At that moment, he realized that he didn't just want to know her name or anything else, but wanted to look at her with his own healing eyes. See her hair, eyes, and sweet face, smile, or hands, and not just see a dark silhouette that didn't allow him to understand anything. This time he only wanted to touch a small lock of her hair, saying that he would definitely repay her for all her kindness and help when she healed him. But he also asked her to tell him her name when she regained her sight. The surprised girl looked at the guy and told him that from the very beginning of their acquaintance, she somehow thought that he had found out everything about her himself, and now she wouldn't even have to say her name or talk about herself. Bringing the girl's black hair to his face, the blonde seemed to want to smell its pleasant aroma, continuing to talk to her, saying that he never found out anything about her for the reason that he didn't want to dig under himself. Liane and Liarte are the direct heirs of the watery, powerful force, and this is known to few, including Mikael, who decided not to find out about everything in order to keep its secret unknown. This is what he told the young girl, raising his red, dark eyes to her silhouette, also adding that he would deliberately not know anything about her, but would only listen to what she herself would tell him. The boy's sincere words amazed the heroine of the story so much that a slight blush appeared on her cheeks, because she had never felt such care and caution from others, even from her family. The couple continued to talk in the snow-white castle, over which the rays of dawn had already cleared and the darkness of the night was leaving. And Liarte was still polite with the man, promising him that she would tell him about herself. When it became light and the heroine left Mikael, she decided to walk around the palace because this was the only thing her older brother had allowed her to do earlier. But she was heading towards the library in order to learn more about magic. She walked down the corridor with moderate steps and thought that now she needed more information about her own abilities, since treating Mikael required more professionalism. As soon as the heroine began to think about Beach, she immediately imagined his dark, evil shadow behind her. And then the girl realized that she had only heard bad things about him before. But he was not like that. The heroine continued walking along the bright corridor, thinking that help for her was increasing anyway, since Mikael himself promised her that he would do everything she wanted. A few minutes later, the protagonist found herself in the library, which she was heading towards, where there were the same bright windows with warm walls, near which there were cabinets with different books. The brunette with blue eyes walked past the shelves with books, looking at them and talking to herself about the fact that she hadn't been here for a long time, namely since the fateful moment that influenced her. The girl remembers that as a child she hid here from those who fiercely hated the unawakened, namely her brothers, who were constantly together and mocked their sister, frightening her. However, the little heroine finally stopped coming to the library after that incident, which made her feel jokingly scared and believe that no one loved her in the palace, be it her father or brothers. Because of sadness, the heroine remembered the events of that day, when her eternally angry father grabbed her by the hand in order to punish her for her misdeed, although in fact, she only wanted to get knowledge in the library. The girl's sad eyes looked at the floor, and she herself stopped thinking about anything else, because the strictness of her father had discouraged her from seeking love and respect in this family. But no matter how sad she was, the desire to learn everything about water magic was stronger, so she began to touch the books one by one with her hand and look at them in order to find the right one for treating Mikael. The heroine in the blue dress would have continued to take books one by one and rummage through each shelf to find the ones she needed, if the one with snow-white blue hair had not appeared next to her. Liarte immediately took notice of him, turning her head and looking at the stranger with shocked eyes, while holding the book in her hand and telling the stranger that she remembered him perfectly well. As it turned out, there was a guy with blue hair standing modestly in front of the girl, clearly shy. But despite everything, he still looked at the lady, as if he wanted to tell her something. He had not only blue hair, but also blue eyes, with which he was embarrassed to look at the main character of the story, covering his feigned smile with his hand and only briefly pronouncing the name of his interlocutor. When the guy got a little closer to the girl, Liarte realized that in front of him stood her old acquaintance, or to be more precise, one of her brothers named Viamin, whom she had not seen for a long time. The protagonist of the story imagined herself next to her hated older brother when she began to think that she had not only him, but two more relatives, making a total of 3. The oldest of them is Ain, the one who constantly comes to Leon and asks him to look at the stone, the second one with red hair named Tandarian, and also Viamin, the sweetest of them all. The main character, Viamin, is almost an heir, so they often played together, hid in the foliage and enjoyed spending time together, telling secrets and mysteries, trusting each other. In the past, they were just cheerful children who gave themselves smiles and laughter, were an ordinary, happy boy and girl, and it seemed that nothing could make their relationship worse. However, one day came for Liarte when Viamin called her to the library, where, putting his hands on the table with various books, he told her with a smile that this was a real find and interesting. At that time, the library had very beautiful ornaments. A chandelier decorated the entire room, and it was in this place, which was actually forbidden to outsiders and especially children, that they planned to learn something new for themselves. The blue-haired boy, fascinated by the new knowledge, immediately opened one of the forbidden books, telling his sister that this was the secret knowledge of their family's magic, which was very interesting and educational. But at this time, the children did not even suspect that the Duke was already about to enter the library, the door of which was suspiciously open, and from it came the sounds of children who should not have been there. Entering the secret room, the father saw his dark-haired daughter and son, who immediately looked at him with excitement and shock because they realized that they were being punished for their mischief. With eyes wild with anger, the gray-haired old man immediately asked the children firmly who dared to enter here, and moreover start reading books about Ellen's magic, which were forbidden to everyone. A drop of sweat appeared on the heroine's face, but she still didn't look as excited as Viamin, who was clearly shocked and scared to the point that he feared his father's wrath more than anything else. With shaking hands, the boy waved to his dad and abruptly tried to tell him that it wasn't he who had lured his sister into reading the library, that it wasn't he who had brought her here intending to have fun and play. This made the Duke even angrier, so he just ran his hand over it and asked his youngest son who dared to open the library and climb into it, even without asking the adults and himself. Then the guy decided to frame his sister, who was innocent of everything, pointing at her with a trembling index finger and saying that it was all her fault and that she needed to be punished to the highest degree. The boy loudly pronounced her name as if she were the culprit, while the main character herself, confused and shocked, could not even say anything against the accusations, which is why she continued to look in amazement at the angry father, who only wanted to punish his own children well. With horror on his face and genuine fear, Viamina pointed his finger at his sister and did not hesitate to lie in front of her, saying that it was she who lured him into the library and forced him to read forbidden publications. Liarte herself only looked with devastation and shock at the one who had previously given her bright, incredible emotions, reasons to laugh, happy moments of childhood, and wonderful, heartfelt conversations. The girl looked fearfully at her father, who was already approaching her, and, as the heroine now remembers, he probably knew that she was innocent, because such a fragile and still stupid lady could not even think about books, but he still wanted to make fun of her. The father still used magical power on his own daughter, which immediately engulfed her, creating pain throughout her body, which was a cruel punishment for someone who just wanted to learn something new. After this incident, the girl constantly avoided Viamin, did not talk to him, but continued to go about her business even when he greeted her and wanted to say something. The boy wanted to ask her about the weather and her health as usual, but after he betrayed her, Liarte only ran away from him, leaving him alone with sadness and devastation in his soul. And now the same man who decided to exchange her friendship and trust for her father's approval stands in front of her and inquires about her condition, still not understanding that Liarte no longer expects anything from him. The shy boy grabbed his hand and, standing near the column, quietly asked how she was doing, trying in this way to start an awkward dialogue with an old friend, his own sister. But the self-confident main character, who was already holding the book she needed in her hands, looked at her brother with anger and contempt, asking how he dared to show his ugly face in front of her. The girl's words seemed to make Viamin's eyes swim, and his excitement only grew, but he continued to stand and hesitate, asking the lady what she was saying and why she was so unhappy. But in the girl's eyes, there was nothing but confidence that she was doing everything right. Because having lived a past life, she remembers that he did not appreciate her kindness, just as he did not appreciate her as a friend. The confused guy with blue hair wanted to ask Liarte about her condition after the recent attack, what they did, but the heroine hastened to leave him, saying that she did not have time. But Viamin was not going to give up so easily, so he put his hand on his chest and turned to the girl again and said that he had made a big mistake in his childhood, and now he was very worried about her. But the girl stood her ground, because as soon as the embarrassed guy remembered that fateful moment, she stopped and said loudly that everything was not as he said. Suddenly turning to the boy with an angry look, the girl told him that he was not interested in her condition, but only wanted to get rid of the feeling of guilt, continuing to be an exemplary child in the eyes of his father. In the empty corridor, the lady turned to the boy and said that on that day, as now, he wanted to remain a good boy, and that was why he did such a stupid thing, so that his dad would not punish him. The heroine directed all her accusations at the one who was now standing in front of her and could not do anything, continuing to listen to a lecture from an old friend about how he only thinks about himself, trying to please his parents. Viamin's whole body trembled from stress, and he himself could not utter a word to the girl, who was already right in everything, and only because of this, the blue-haired aristocrat could not even say that everything was wrong or that she was lying. Only after this did the girl with black hair turn her back to him again and cast an indifferent glance, admitting that she did not expect an apology from him, because she was not going to forgive him anyway. The boy, saddened by everything, did not dare to leave so quickly, because he suddenly grabbed her wrist and shouted her name, as if trying to bring back the friendship they had. But the surprise of the already shocked Viamin became even stronger when the black-haired beauty made his hand jump back with one movement of her body, thereby making it clear that he would not convince her. Continuing to keep her palm away from her former friend, she looked at him with a sad, empty, and somewhere anxious gaze, repeating once again that the best thing for him was to be a good child in the eyes of his father. In the end, the heroine left Viamin with nothing, abandoning and walking away, when he himself looked at her with anger and starch, still holding his hand raised, with which he intended to stop his girlfriend. The day quickly turned to night, and so darkness fell again over the palace of the main character and her family, decorated with stars and dark clouds, smoothly floating over the horizon. Mikael was not sitting idle in the castle, but was already talking to his servant, calmly opening his lips and asking him whether, according to the results of the investigation, Elhein's spirit stone had awakened. The white-haired man with the red blindfold stood calmly, and with his arms crossed, asked the servant if he had told him everything he wanted, and if there was any more important news regarding his enemies. Having bowed, Valto answered his master that everything was exactly so, and that was all that he had managed to find out. Secretly staying in the palace and spying on the right people. The two men stood opposite each other when the blonde man with the bandage asked the knight for proof of his words, but he replied that he had no proof. But he had been on the brink of death several times, so he simply asked to believe him. With his head down, the knight silently hoped that his master would accept his words as they were, and not call them lies, because Birch really likes to distrust everyone without visible evidence. While continuing to bow to his master, he had a forced smile on his face and was already thinking that Mikael would send him out to gather more information again. But he didn't expect that he would only agree with his words. The guy opened his gray eyes in surprise, continuing to stand in a stupor, not understanding why at that very moment Mikael did not demand more from him, but only accepted his words as an unverified truth. Valto noticed that his master had just sat down on the sofa and told him to send a letter to his father to ask him about the spirit stone. And then the knight realized that Mikael was most likely crazy if he was behaving so recklessly. However, in front of the servant was not a crazy man, as he might have mistakenly assumed, but the always smiling Mikael, from whom only calm and slight interest in the awakened relic emanated. Valto noticed this, so he smiled and asked the gentleman if he was in a good mood today, to which the smiling Mikael replied that he was, because the time of the mysterious stranger's arrival was very soon. The knight with short gray hair immediately imagined in his head that very lady in white who often visits him, and then he realized that she was not only his healer, but a reason to smile and be happier. Valto realized that he should leave so as not to embarrass the couple with his presence, and soon complete darkness fell over the palace, where dark clouds seemed to be fluttering in the wind along with the leaves. The blind gentleman sat quietly in his place and waited for the arrival of the young girl in complete silence, relying only on his hearing and sense of smell, which, fortunately, was developed enough for him not to worry. The guy tapped his index finger on his thigh, creating a simple rhythm, under which he expected to hear the long-awaited rustling of the lady, her voice to enjoy her scent of the ocean and purity. But what he heard in front of him was completely different from what he expected, which made him slowly stand up with the same sly grin, as if saying to himself that he just wanted to sit alone and wait for the beauty to arrive. The fact is that the murderers with daggers appeared again in front of the gentleman himself, who intended to cripple him, but the relaxed Mikael himself walked towards them as if they had come to say goodbye to life. The nobleman's hand was already preparing to snatch the sword from its sheath when he thought that this did not look like the work of his enemy, Duke Elhein, which meant that the killers were sent by the one who cursed his eyes. With a slight movement of his hand, he snatched the sword from its holster, showed them its blade, and said with a smile that such a small dagger would be enough for them, because his skill alone was capable of protecting him. In fact, the red, cursed eyes of the gentleman under the bandage were open, and he thought that he should not use magic here because it could attract Elhein, and also he should not take a loud gun. With the firm intention of quietly dealing with the hooligans in black robes, he only began to look at one of them, who was already intending to cripple him, quickly approaching closer and closer. But as soon as the killer even took a swing at the experienced warrior, Mikael forced him to move away with one strong blow, so that the blondain wouldn't finish him off with another precise blow. Easily dealing with each prankster, the blind gentleman could not stop thinking about who sent them here, and what was the purpose of their customer, if they so strongly intended to kill him. With deft movements of his hand, he made the killers flying at him jump back time after time, but in his head, Mikael continued to think about his own, realizing that Elhein never loses his vigilance on his territory, but here for some reason he did not notice two criminals. While finishing off the last assassin with a quick blow, the blind boy assumed in his thoughts that someone really wanted to make him quarrel with Duke Elhein, and wanted it very badly. But the fight would have remained a fight if Mikael, who was focused on the battle, had not heard the voice of a girl calling his name behind him, who was standing behind the closed door and was afraid to enter. The gentleman immediately flew to the door and slammed it, saying that he was cleaning the room and she had come a little at the wrong time. But the heroine with the white one, surprised by her behavior, understood that something was wrong here. Immediately after this, the aristocrat noticed that the people who had previously run at him and tried to at least scratch him with their daggers suddenly froze. And then Mikael raised his head, not understanding what was going on. With his blind eyes, Mikael saw only motionless silhouettes. But this was enough to understand one thing, namely that all the criminals had actually stopped moving, like dolls. Everything became clear to the gentleman when he was able to feel with his body the warmth of the girl's magic, which was already penetrating his room and forcing each hooligan to stand still, while the blonde himself held the dagger in surprise. Turning her head and thus looking out from behind the door, the blue-eyed girl looked at the guy and asked him if everything was okay, as her beautiful face continued to be illuminated by the magical magic of water. Taking off his bandage and looking at the lady with red eyes, together with a sincere smile on his face, the man replied that of course everything was fine with him, and there was no need to worry so much about his condition. Liarte looked out from behind the door, looking at the gentleman who for some reason remained in a good mood, and asking him why he was like this, because a couple of minutes ago he was in great danger. But the heroine instantly forgot what else she wanted to say to her friend when she looked at his handsome face and noticed something on it that should not have been there. The girl was very surprised by the gentleman's small cut on his cheek, to which she immediately extended her gentle palms with the words that she would definitely heal him when everything was over. Unable to bear the concern, the guy quickly turned away from the girl, blushing more and more with each passing second, because he was enchanted by the attention of the lady, who was only interested in him even in a room full of blood. The grown man even covered his face with his hand out of surprise, shock, and embarrassment, because he felt perfectly well that he was blushing from the mere thought that she was making his heart tremble more and more. After a while, the noise in Mikael's room became less, and a quiet midnight fell over the palace with a beautiful, dark sky from which the moonlight fell, illuminating the foundations of the castle. But no matter how quiet the atmosphere around was, the blonde man in the light shirt still kept his hand on the handle of the dagger, ready to pull it out and telling Liarte that thanks to her, it would be easier to figure things out. He was referring to the 3 paralyzed ninjas who couldn't even move a finger due to the strong water magic that the main character cast on them, thus making it easier for him to confront them. The main character was left standing behind because Mikael stood in front of her, preparing a weapon and telling her not to create, as it was dangerous and he would handle everything himself. But what happened next surprised them both, as the ninjas who had previously acted like real people suddenly began to crack as if they were made of stone, like dolls or mannequins, inanimate creatures. The first to notice this was Liarte, who was immediately very surprised, opening her eyes wider and continuing to watch as the killers cracked and collapsed over and over again, which only indicated that they were not real. Then the strange phenomenon was noticed by the gentleman himself, who did not rush to kill them, but only watched as all 3 hooligans gradually turned into light ash falling to the floor. And the lady in white herself was afraid to move when an inexplicable event, planned by someone, was happening before her, quite frightening, because it wasn't every day that she saw people crumbling onto the sand. Having moved away a little from the mystical, evaporated creatures and shielded them from herself with her hand, the lady told Mikael that this was no longer her doing, because she herself was surprised by what was happening no less than he was. Coming closer to the ashes that were formed after the people in dark clothes, the girl realized that these were not just their remains, but something strange, where their bones and skull were also visible, like a person who had been dead for a long time. She wanted to kneel down to examine the strange ash, which she had never seen before, and which was surely imbued with the same strange, insidious magic, capable of killing or frightening anyone. A drop of sweat from excitement ran down the face of the cute girl with black hair as she continued to peer into the bully's skull and realized that this was definitely not a curse. Otherwise, there would be letters and strange patterns here. But this was ancient magic that someone had awakened just to cripple Mikael. Having drawn conclusions, the girl rose to her feet and, turning to the gentleman with the blindfold, firmly told him that she did not feel any magic here, although she did not know what it was. And her words calmed the blonde. The man lowered his hand to the floor to pick up the fallen dagger, while telling the young lady that he was glad that they were no longer a danger, and that something worse had not happened because of them. As if nothing had happened, the gentleman sat down on his favorite sofa and, sighing, told Liarte that he would send his people to find out what it was. And to this, the heroine said that this was the right decision, and that she needed to be more careful. Smiling sweetly, she looked at Mikael and said that if everything was already fine and they were in a calm environment, she would remove the seal from him, thereby continuing the treatment for the curse and blindness. The words of the charming lady slightly embarrassed Mikael, who was already happy about her visit, so not only a smile appeared on his face, but also a blush, as if every word of the heroine made him embarrassed. But time passed, and so Liarte immediately got down to the most important thing, and after a few minutes, real, healing water magic reigned between the couple, allowing the gentleman to feel relief and calm. In front of the blind man's face was a blue, glowing symbol with different patterns and hieroglyphs, while the aristocrat was thinking that the healer had already removed 2 seals, and now 5 remained to be cured. However, no matter how much he wanted to quickly get his sight, get rid of the curse and live a full life, in the beautiful palace far from him, where the sun was gradually rising. Completely different. Important things were going on. In front of the noblemen, the remains of those who had previously had the goal of crippling Mikael were placed on the floor, and the servant who showed this to his master also said that they were unable to maintain their form. In front of the servant sat a relaxed blonde gentleman in the most luxurious robes of all, and with his indifference and monotonous voice, he ordered the guard to simply throw away these remains. The aristocrat with an unusual appearance has the name Lucas Franz, and he is the crown prince of the kingdom in which Mikael and Liarte are now. But like many others, the red-eyed guy also wants to quickly get rid of the hated Bursch. A servant knelt before the lord on the throne, asking what he would then order to be done with those puppets that had been sent to Duke Elhain, but the prince said that he did not need them. With a sly smile, the prince, who had unusual red eyes, told the servant that according to his plan, the Duke and Mikael should already suspect each other, and it will be difficult for them to find out who is really behind this. The prince's servant raised his eyes with frightening, unnatural bruises to the aristocrat, saying that they still did not know how things were with Mikael, and maybe he was already better and not cursed. The prince, in a snow-white suit with red decorations, only looked away thoughtfully and asked the servant if he thought that the Duke and Mikael had begun to cooperate rather than fight. To this, the man only bowed to his master and said that he should not worry, since even the strongest aristocrat Elhain could not remove his blindness, which meant that they could not be friends. Then the prince remembered the Duke's son, Leon, who probably possessed the strongest water magic. But Lucas realized that only he could remove his curse for Mikael, and he needed to visit them immediately. The imperious master looked at the servant with a red eye and ordered him to immediately send his letter to the ducal family, demanding an urgent visit to the Elhains. The next day, when a pleasant, warm light was penetrating the palace of the Liarte family, the entire male part of the Hergtsov aristocracy gathered to discuss the state of the Spirit Stone. The Duke himself, Ain with Leon and Viamin, were sitting at a long table when the elder brother informed everyone present that the stone had begun not only to glow, but also to pulsate like a heart. With a smile on his face, he informed all the men that his awakening would happen very soon, and that this meant that Leon would become much stronger, but no one suspected that only Liarte had the power. There was some excitement and confusion on Viamin's face, as if this was not good news for him, but a reason to be wary. And at this time, Aen also said that the stone had awakened only thanks to Leon, although this was not so. It seemed that Leon himself did not imagine himself to be the center of the entire conversation and the most important figure, because his thoughtful appearance suggested that he was thinking not about himself, but about his sister. He remembers the worried maid who turned to him when he asked him about Liarte, where she had gone and who had seen her. But the confused maid seemed to be reluctant to tell the boy anything. But Leon continued to stand confidently next to her, waiting for an answer. And then the girl confessed that the heroine didn't say a word about him, didn't look for him, and didn't want to see him, as if she wasn't his relative anymore. The maid's words were so ingrained in the boy's memory that he himself did not notice how, because of them, he did not pay attention to the fact that his father was calling him, and only his loud voice made him wake up and open his eyes wider. He no longer thought about the changed Liarte because he turned to his father and asked him what he wanted to tell him, because now he had to worry about family affairs and politics and not about his little sister. Smiling only towards his sons, the Duke looked kindly at his son and, folding his hands, said that since he would soon come of age, he needed to find a wife, worthy and noble. As soon as the conversation turned to his brother's marriage, Ain immediately took out an envelope from under his jacket, asking Leon to look at it, because this was exactly what he would need in the near future. Taking the letter out of the envelope, Ain solemnly told everyone that this was a message from the Crown Prince himself, who had a desire to visit them in the near future and discuss something important. Ain also added that they could take the chance and ask him to marry his sister, Ninian, to Liana, a beautiful lady with white hair and a pink dress, worthy of being a duchess. But Leon, sad for some reason, only answered his elder brother that he didn't care who his wife would be. So he didn't mind Ninian, who was already good in herself, a pleasant lady and conversationalist. In fact, the brunette had been in contact with Ninian since childhood, and he still remembers how they read a book together under a tree. And then Leon, who was indifferent to Lady Leon, already knew that she liked him as a boyfriend and future husband. But no matter how joyful and cheerful a princess like Ninian was in front of him, he still could not help but notice next to her a calm sister who did not interfere in their games, but only sat sadly to the side. Memories again brought Leon to thoughts about his sister, who, when she was little, was a very sad-looking child. But with her, he felt most at ease, and this thought made his brother feel empty in his soul. But as soon as he remembered his sister's recent look, which only said that Liarte sincerely hated her brother, Leon realized that something in her had changed radically, which hurt his heart. But the whole Leon family did not notice the sad aristocrat, because everyone was only happy with the news of the imminent engagement of the princess to their heir, which would be very good for their politics and position in society. When Ain asked his father when he intended to invite the prince to them, he only said with a sly smile that he would receive him on the day when the event in honor of welcoming Mikael would open. The Duke grinned even more then. When he told his sons that they would hold a grand banquet that night, and by these words he meant that he probably wanted to arrange a plan to eliminate Birch. And also, in order to achieve his goal, they would also arrange a hunting competition. Meanwhile, in the main character's palace, she was once again removing the seal from Mikael, allowing his vision to gradually return, while water magic with glowing symbols was flaunted around. With her eyes closed and her brows furrowed, the girl warned the gentleman that it would be a little more difficult to remove the seal this time, so she would have to put in more effort, and she apologized in advance for the inconvenience. But the calm aristocrat told the worried lady that she shouldn't worry about him, also looking at the heroine with his beautiful red eyes, wanting to unsee her at any moment. As he thought about how he only had 2 layers of the curse left to remove, he remembered his recent conversation with Valto, namely the moment when he stood with his back to him and said that he could already see everything around him dimly. An agitated Valto asked the gentleman if he could only see a little. Would it be difficult for him to participate in the hunting competition that Duke Elhine had prepared for him? But Mikael remained silent for a long time. The red eyes of the blonde, thoughtful, and cold looked into nowhere, because Mikael himself creates that the Duke really wants to humiliate him if he invites him to the competition with the perfect understanding that he is blind. The aristocrat's hand clenched into a fist in anger, and Mikael realized that someday he would definitely trample him. But for now, he would pretend that he was having fun, and that this was just simple entertainment for him. Remembering the entire conversation with Valto, the blonde continued to frown and endure the water magic of the main character, which still affected him with such force that his short hair curled as if in the wind. But the hero's patience was rewarded, because as soon as the girl finished her spell, he saw in front of him a gradually emerging, blurry silhouette of a brunette, interested in his condition. As soon as Mikael's vision became clear and healthy, the first thing he saw in front of him was an incredibly beautiful lady with deep blue eyes and black curls that she was tucking behind her ear. Having looked at the heroine of the story for just one moment, Mikael opened his eyes so wide as if he saw a miracle of nature in front of him, and not the one who had been healing him with magic all the time and protecting him from loneliness. Liarte didn't understand why the guy suddenly blushed and turned away from her, and Mikael didn't know where to go, just so the beauty wouldn't notice his huge embarrassment and red-as-pepper face. However, she still noticed the sudden change in the guy's mood, which made her feel awkward, and her face blushed as she continued to look at Mikael and bewildered by what was happening. Liarte asked modestly if everything was okay, and the aristocrat, covering the smile on his flushed face, answered the lady that everything was fine with him. But the man's behavior itself spoke of something completely different. Gaining confidence, the blonde looked at her with a lively, interested, and curious look, telling the lady that he was undoubtedly glad to see her right after he regained his sight. The gentleman thought that simple words of gratitude were not enough for Liarte, so he confidently took the girl's small hand, presenting it to himself to kiss, being a true gentleman. The surprised heroine looked at the extraordinary blonde man who kissed her hand, saying along the way that not only he, but also his entire Birch family would never forget her kindness and generosity, and would remember her forever. Raising his garnet eyes with lush eyelashes to the girl, the man also added that despite the fact that she only had 1 seal left to remove, he believed that she would do it without any problems. Also, getting up from his seat and hanging over the silent, blue-eyed beauty, Mikael said with a smile that, as he had promised earlier, he would certainly do for her everything that she asked of him. The guy immediately decided to act, so he asked the black-haired girl what exactly she wanted. But the man's question only put the heroine in a dead end, because she had not wanted anything for a long time. Then, remembering her loneliness and those moments of life when she, hunched over with sadness, was all alone, the lady realized that she no longer wanted to repeat the mistakes of her past life. Once she was in front of Mikael, everything around her seemed to disappear and cease to exist. So she simply lowered her hand, realizing that that pain, along with the humiliation, should not overtake her again. Besides all the worst, the girl remembered that turning point in her life when she first met Mikael, who was surprised by her and her desire to help him in exchange for the same help. The main character remembered that at the beginning of her acquaintance with the aristocrat, she promised him that she would definitely tell him about herself and say her name, so the lady opened her lips, intending to do so. Imagining herself alone again, the long-haired lady quietly and modestly told Mikael that her name was Liarte Elhain, although in reality she was thinking that she was a disgrace to the family. As if locked in a prison behind bars, empty and useless, she imagined herself desperate on her knees, because her own name brought back memories of how she was only unhappy here. Placing her hand on her chest, the lady looked resolutely at Mikael with a look that was set for change, saying that she only wanted to leave this palace as soon as possible and say goodbye to her family forever.